I have stood at a great many ceremonies, state funerals, coronations, the anniversaries of battles older than my father's father. I have stood in the rain until my boots filled with water, and in summer heat until the wool of my tunic felt like a second skin sewn on with wire. I have watched heads of state arrive in motorcades, watched the great and the powerful pass within an arm's reach of me, while I stared at the middle, distance, and felt absolutely nothing, or rather felt everything and showed none of it. That is the work. That is what we are. But of all the days I spent in the scarlet and the bearskin, there is one afternoon I return to when I want to remember why any of it mattered. It was the remembrance ceremony at the Cathedral of St. Aldrich, a solemn event held each autumn in the capital of the fictional house of Edenmore, a state tradition older than the republic that had briefly replaced it and then been replaced itself. The cathedral square was dressed in gray November light, and the crowd that lined the route was deep, 7 people thick in places. Ordinary citizens who had come to watch the procession of regimental standards and to pay their respects in the plain, wordless way that ordinary people do. Carver was the one standing beside me on the ceremonial post. I want to be precise about that. It was Carver, not me, who did what he did. I was the witness. I am telling you this story because I saw it from 2 feet away, and because Carver himself never spoke about it afterward, not to the regiment, not to the officers who asked, not to the journalist who somehow got wind of it and wanted a comment. He simply went back to his post the following morning, and he never said a word. So I will say it for him, because men like Carver deserve to have the record kept. We had been at our position for 3 hours when the old man arrived. He was somewhere in his late 80s, I would guess. Slight, bent at the shoulders, wearing a regimental blazer that had seen better decades. The medals on his chest were the real kind. Campaign ribbons, a service cross, a clasp I recognized from the border campaigns that predated my own enlistment by 40 years. He was with a younger woman, a granddaughter perhaps, who had guided him to a gap in the barrier close to our position, and the old man had settled in there with the specific satisfaction of a veteran who has earned his spot at such a thing and knows it. He stood very still. He watched the approach of the standard bearers with an expression I can only describe as a man returning to a country he had not visited in a long time and finding it still standing. The drunk man appeared about 20 minutes before the main procession was due. He was not the loud, staggering sort of drunk. He was the worst kind, composed enough to pass for sober, just loose enough to say the things that sober men know better than to say. He was well dressed, expensive coat, polished shoes, and he carried himself with the ease of a man accustomed to rooms where no one questioned him. He pressed into the gap beside the old soldier, not roughly but firmly the way powerful people occupy space. And then, apparently because he was bored or because the old man's medals caught his eye, he began to talk. I could hear it from where I stood. Not every word, but enough. Something about the blazer being old-fashioned. Something about the medals being decorations they handed out to anyone who showed up. A low, indifferent laugh. The kind of commentary a man delivers not because he wants an answer, but because he is used to being the most important thing in any room, and silence makes him uneasy. The old soldier did not react. He kept his eyes on the square, his hands folded over the barrier, and he simply absorbed it the way a stone wall absorbs weather. But I saw his jaw tighten. I saw the granddaughter put her hand on his arm. That was when I looked at Carver. I should explain something about Carver. He had been in the regiment for 11 years at that point. He was not the tallest guardsman, not the most decorated, not the one who made an impression at formal dinners or drew a crowd at the regimental competitions. He was the kind of man who arrived early and left late and never mentioned either. He had done 2 tours with a specialist unit before transferring to ceremonial duties. Something to do with an injury that had healed well enough for the post but not well enough for the field. He did not talk about that either. What I knew about Carver I had learned from watching him work. He was exact, he was quiet, and in 11 years I had never once seen him do anything that was not precisely what the occasion required. He was looking at the drunk man. I want to be careful here because the easy version of this story is that Carver made some grand gesture, something theatrical, something you could put in a headline. That is not what happened. What happened was so restrained it was almost invisible, and that is exactly what made it unforgettable. The procession reached our position. The standard bearers came first. The colors of 6 regiments, including the one whose badge was sewn on the old soldier's blazer, and as those colors drew level with us, the entire crowd stilled. That is the tradition. The colors pass, the crowd goes quiet, and those who have served come to attention if they are able. The old man straightened. It took visible effort. The shoulders that had curved inward under the weight of years came back. Not all the way, not the way they would have come back 50 years ago, but enough. His chin lifted, his right hand, gnarled and slow, moved to the brim of an imaginary cap in a salute that was old-fashioned and completely correct and quietly magnificent. The drunk man said something. I did not catch the words. But the tone was audible, a short dismissive sound, the kind a man makes to indicate that what he is watching strikes him as faintly ridiculous. Carver moved, not toward the drunk man. That is the first thing to understand. He did not step out of position, did not lay a hand on anyone, did not so much as turn his head in the man's direction. He turned toward the old soldier. He came to a full attention. Ramrod, correct. Immaculate, and then he brought his right hand up in a salute, a formal held, unambiguous salute, directed at the old man's medals, and at the colors passing, and at every year the old man had given to something larger than himself. It was not a gesture Carver owed anyone in that moment. It was not in the ceremony's program. It was not the sort of thing a guardsman on post does without an order. It was simply the right thing. The crowd saw it. People close enough to understand what was happening went quiet. A different quiet from the one the colors had brought, smaller but deeper. The granddaughter put both hands over her mouth. The old soldier held his salute a moment longer than he had intended, I think, because he was looking at Carver now, and something had passed across his face that I do not have a precise word for. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. The recognition of one man by another across the distance of years and rank and occasion, a recognition that says, I see what you gave. I see what it cost. It was not nothing. The drunk man said nothing more. He did not leave immediately, but he stopped talking and he moved, by degrees back into the crowd and away. Whatever he had brought to that spot, the casual contempt, the need to diminish what he did not understand, it had nowhere to land. Carver had not addressed him, had not looked at him, had not given him the argument he perhaps wanted or the reaction he perhaps expected. He had simply made the drunk man irrelevant by doing something more important in the same space. That is the only power Carver ever used. After the ceremony, as to when we had been stood down, were walking the long route back to the barracks. I came alongside him and I said, the old man saw every second of that. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he earned it a long time before I did. That was the whole of it. We walked the rest of the way without speaking, the way men do when the thing that needed saying has been said. I have thought about that afternoon often in the years since, about what it takes to stand in a crowd and absorb contempt without answering it, about the particular discipline that does not come from rules or training, but from knowing quietly and completely what is worth defending and what is not. The drunk man left that cathedral square believing, I suspect, that nothing of consequence had happened. He was wrong. Something of consequence had happened. It just had not happened to him. The old soldier raised his hand in a salute, and a guardsman returned it, and for one long moment the distance between the past and the present closed. That is the work. That is what we are.